Okay, so we've got to talk about this. Essentially, it is now possible to run FSR4, AMD's next generation machine learning based upscaler, on older GPU architectures and indeed on NVIDIA architectures, if what I'm reading here is correct. Essentially, there was some kind of rogue source code leak from AMD itself that included the ability to compile a DLL for FSR4 that would run on older AMD architectures. The way it's been done is essentially that it's using INT8 machine learning based instructions, which are supported on RDNA 2 upwards, I believe, and of course is supported by NVIDIA. And somebody's put together a DLL, and it's remarkably easy to actually introduce FSR4 for those other pieces of hardware simply by, well, for native FSR4 games, it's really straightforward. You just copy a few DLLs across and do a bit of renaming. And it's just kind of remarkable stuff. Now, we have got some performance numbers here. I did actually do some testing here. Yeah, but this is still very much work in progress, I would say, in terms of what it is we're actually dealing with here. There's a lot of unknowns. Let's do some benchmarking, though. I chose the 7700 XT. 12 gigabyte VRAM card there. The reason I chose that is because there are concerns that an INT8 version of FSR4 has significant performance penalties, and I didn't want to sort of blast past those restrictions by using something like a 7900 XTX. So let's take a look at Cyberpunk 2077 here. It's actually a comparison of the high setting running at 1800p resolution, no ray tracing, yes, native result there on the left, 57.95 FPS average. Now, here we are comparing XESS. I believe this is 2.0, so we've had to actually change the quality level from balance to quality. 27.6% advantage over native. FSR4, though, actually faster, 34% faster than native. FSR3, though, faster still, 44%. To the better against native. FSR3, basically an 8% advantage over FSR4, with FSR4 having 92% of FSR3 performance. So here's the thing, right? And there are a lot of question marks. And Alex, I'm curious what you think about this. We'll talk about some other benchmarks shortly. But let's say we've got a fully armed and operational version of FSR4 upscaling here that is capable of running really nicely on older RDNA 3 GPUs, possibly RDNA 2. We've not tested that yet. And the performance hit isn't actually that huge and is actually better than XESS. I guess there are questions here about why it only exists in this form and why it wasn't ever given a rollout. My guess is that AMD basically wanted to focus on one product and to get it out there and to iterate on that and go from there. But there is obviously a lot of interest in an INT8 version of FSR4 because, well, at some point there's going to be an INT8 version of FSR4 that is the next generation version of PSSR for PS5 Pro. So what's your take on all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of an NVIDIA-like move there, where I think NVIDIA has released technologies in the past, especially the most recent past, where I'm pretty sure they would run on the previous generation to some degree. For example, I really think FrameGen's newest multi-frame gen mode, based upon the differences between Ada Lovelace and Blackwell, should at least be capable of running on something like a 4080 or a 4090 with great ease. Because if we see it running on 5060s, which have far less compute and far less machine learning capabilities than a 4090 or 4080, then I don't see why it could also not run those things. And I kind of feel like it's slightly different here because there is actually a great difference in machine learning capabilities between RDNA 4 GPUs and RDNA 3 GPUs. But the fact that they already had this version in there, in the source code that they accidentally released, tells me that they were definitely thinking about it and were working on it. And the reason's probably, like you suggest, that they really just wanted to focus on promoting and getting the version of FSR4 for RDNA 4 out in a good way, and it came out in an incredibly good way. We pretty much only had positive things to say about it. The only thing that was slightly negative about it was it did have a slightly higher performance cost than the equivalent DLSS 3 or 4 settings relative to like output resolution and things like that. And here it would just be, once again, proportionally heavier again, but based upon your performance metrics there, even on a not top end RDNA 3 GPU, it seems rather reasonable. Yeah. And then I think that's all great. I just do slightly wonder why they didn't, just like you, I do wonder a little bit why they didn't think about at least putting forward more public statements about whether it has a future or not. Because currently I think it's a bit unknown whether this will ever come out at all.
Well, there is going to be an INT8 version of FSR4 called Next Generation PSSR. And I do think strategically it makes a lot of sense for AMD to backport FSR4 to older architectures, specifically for handheld. We've seen some testing this week from other outlets which have, basically got this running on a Steam Deck. And they are talking about a computational cost, a hit to frame rate, but it does seem to be borne out by higher quality visuals. I'm going to talk about some other benchmarks, which I did, because obviously every single game that implements an upscaler has a different performance increase based on how that upscaler is implemented and, obviously the content of the game itself. Monster Hunter Wilds, let's have a look at this one then on the 7700 XT. This is high settings, high RT, 1440p resolution, native resolution, result 53 FPS essentially, 24% boost on XeSS. However, only 21.5% on this new FSR4 injection method. FSR3, mind you, 37.7% performance improvement, which is kind of like what you'd kind of expect, really. This is using balanced upscaling, which is kind of quality on XeSS based on the way they've essentially renamed things there. So in this case, FSR3 is like 13.3% faster than FSR4, meaning FSR4 has 88.3% of FSR3 performance. It kind of changes there. I'd still say, though, that it's worth doing, right? Especially if the image quality improvements are there. And obviously, there's the possibility of anti-aliasing improvements there. Let's talk about Miles Morales, Spider-Man game, which I found to be acting in a rather weird way. 4K settings, RT optimized here. Native resolution, 44.89 frames per second, but look at those frame times. Man, that's gnarly. I'm kind of wondering whether running natively here is actually hitting the 12 gigabyte limit of the 7700 XT. But when we use upscaling, frame times behave a lot better. A 48% increase with XeSS, 55% with FSR4. But here's the weird thing: FSR3 and indeed ITGI, the Insomniac upscaling solution, it's basically a doubling of performance here. It's way ahead of the other upscalers there. Could be a bug in Miles Morales there, but regardless, slightly strange results there all around. There's outstanding questions though, isn't there, Alex?
Yeah.
Specifically. And you put this to me quite succinctly. The maths has changed. By moving from, I think it's FP8 that the standard FSR4 uses, right? By moving to INT8, obviously things have changed. There's also, the question of whether this is actually anything like the most modern version of FSR4 that AMD actually put out. So I think we need to do some image quality comparisons to actually figure out whether this is, actually in any way worthwhile data at all.
Yeah, I mean, based upon what I've seen and a couple of comparison screenshots, and this is no surprise to anyone, it's better looking than FSR3. Right. I don't think it's very hard to get better. Well, it is hard enough, but improving on the areas where FSR3 fails is a great boon to things all over the place. That's why we love FSR4. And we've seen already improvements there. So it is at least better than that. But the question is, would it be the exact same as bog standard FSR4? And I would probably contend it will be different. in some ways, it's kind of also by the reason that I think Mark Cerny is reluctant to call the next version of PSSR FSR4 just on console. He's like, no, it's like a collaboration. It's FSR4 maybe infused or something like that. And I think otherwise, yeah. The reason why I'd say otherwise is because if it was the same quality and with the same constraints and same weighting and all that, we would see what we kind of see when you run the transformer model on lower end, older Ampere and Turing GPUs on the NVIDIA side, especially for something like ray reconstruction, where the hit to performance is quite a lot greater on those GPUs. So that's why I think it won't actually be the same quality in all cases. I think maybe for basic cases, it could be very similar. But as soon as you start stressing the model more with like different content and different problem areas, I think it could actually end up showing different image quality. But that is my speculation at the moment. I think we actually probably should do a image quality analysis of some sort in the near future.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm curious what you think about all of this, Oliver.
I think it's a very compelling option, potentially, especially for those RDNA 3 GPUs. I know that AMD was talking about porting FSR4 for RDNA 3, and it seems like something that would be imminently doable, or at least kind of in the range of something that's as doable as like DP4A XeSS, something that could enhance image quality meaningfully in that hardware. But I was kind of thinking, kind of spitballing about this, for consoles, because we do know that Microsoft pursued some kind of ML-based upscaling for Xbox Series machines early on. In like 2020 or 2021, they were showing off some machine learning based upscaler, some relatively primitive one running an Xbox hardware. But I kind of expect that like even on that class of hardware, which does have INT8 acceleration, the RDNA 2 based Xbox hardware, notably not on the PlayStation side, at least with the PlayStation 5 base console, not with, obviously with the PS5 Pro, it's a different story. But I think that in that case, you're looking at, again, some questions about the quality of that acceleration, some questions about if it would actually be performant enough within a reasonable amount of frame time for reasonable upscale targets with reasonable internal resolutions relative to other solutions, relative to a TAU, certainly relative to FSR2 and 3, which have become kind of the default multi-cross-engine upscaler of choice this generation for the consoles. I think there'd be some serious questions about whether that's reasonably feasible. And then, of course, producing a neural network of this quality, producing something that can actually, beat FSR2 and FSR3 in different scenarios across different kinds of image quality challenges, I think is very challenging. Like we've already seen, with PSSR, even that when you have, a firm like Sony trying their hand at this, it isn't necessarily always beating those other solutions, or at least initially did not beat those other solutions across different kinds of image upscaling scenarios and different kinds of games. So I would be, certainly interested. Like I know people talk about like the, 97 int for tops or whatever on Series X, but I think realistically, this probably is not something that's going to be suitable for the level of machine learning acceleration that's in the current generation consoles. I'd venture that, any kind of solution like this would only really be suitable for the PlayStation 5 Pro, or obviously next generation console machines. I don't think it would be great for last generation hardware.
Yeah, I did want to do more testing, but my test PC stopped working. But what I did do was to basically go back to Cyberpunk 2077 with this injected form of FSR4. And yes, the RX 7700 XT, 1440p output resolution, balanced mode, and essentially our settings are equivalent to the PlayStation 5 performance mode, but I've added in Alex's optimized RT settings, which are essentially reflections on and lighting at medium, ray-traced lighting at medium. That gives you kind of like the headline RT features, so to speak. It's nowhere near maxed out, but it is a really nice looking ray-traced experience. Kicking off with balance mode. This is VRR here, which I think is kind of like, it's still topping out at 60, but it dips into the 50s. But I think the question is really, Alex, the quality of the output. I think it looks okay, bearing in mind that FSR3 balance mode at 1440p resolution has got more issues than Top Gear magazine.
Yes. I think the reason why this could be worth it, depending upon your, I would say like the overall GPU compute experience, like how much you have in total, like I think as you get lower down, like Oliver was talking about, it becomes less useful because you're sacrificing potentially a lot of frame time to get this feature on. But I think the one thing that it has a major benefit for is like you're describing, where you're at 1440p, 1080p, and really those are resolutions that we've typically not really liked FSR 223's output on them, where it gets better. Basically, it gets pretty darn great, at least like, maybe above balanced mode in 4K. That's like really where we've seen it excelling. And here, it just becomes, you can actually do other things at those resolutions now. You can actually push things that you otherwise wouldn't have before, in spite of it being a little bit heavier. But, this is kind of what XeSS has been for a lot of RDNA 2 and RDNA 3 users. But now if this became a more official option, then it would be, I don't know, most likely preferable.
Yeah. Looking at the footage there, I actually went from FSR for balanced to FSR for performance. And there's an issue kind of like on our sort of internal time codes here about 350, where you can see what looks like, well, it's sort of definitely the case that AMD needs very reconstruction of some description at some point, because the shimmering on the puddle there, it is ray traced, but it's quite ugly,
control. Right? Yeah, it's not the greatest, no.
But, that aside, even the FSR4 performance at 1440p, which will be internal 720p, I don't think it looks unattractive apart from those sort of more obvious artifacts. So I think, there's two ways we can look at this. I think at some point there probably is going to be some sort of backport of FSR4 for older architectures. And I think handheld may well be one of the most, biggest driving factors for that, because I don't think we're going to be seeing RDNA 4 in handhelds. So, and obviously those handhelds do need a good upscaler, I think it's fair to say at this point. And obviously there is the PSSR stuff going on, which again is going to be INT8 based in nature. But all I can say is I'm kind of quite happy from a certain point of view that we've actually got this leak, that we can actually do some testing. We can actually get some idea of how FSR4 would look on those older architectures. Obviously, I don't think AMD is going to be making any kind of statements about this or providing any kind of information about it, because, ultimately it wasn't supposed to leak, was it?
No.
But it's certainly a fascinating sort of one of the most fascinating leaks that I just sort of had to take a look at that and see how it all panned out. And I do suspect that a lot of people are going to be injecting this into future FSR4 native games, because it is just a really simple case of just swapping over some DLLs. And I understand that FSR 3.1 games that don't have native FSR4 support, you can use Optiscaler to inject this DLL. So, there's a lot of opportunity for people to actually get a really good machine learning based upscaler out there, even if it's not in any way officially supported, but a fascinating revelation nonetheless.